This is Learning with Lattes production by Mainline Information Systems.
All right, so hey, it is the top of the hour, so it is time to get rolling. So again, thank you all for being here. My name is Marie Ashway. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Mainline, and with me are Brian Grandin, Christina Perez, Dave Burke. Cesar and Kay don't have their video cameras open, but they are here as well. All right, so we would like to know about your organization's goals for using new technology. All right, this is interesting. Let me just share this out so everybody can see this. So this is what you all said. Modernization is pretty much tied with security when I hit the end button. So modernization and security are the top primary goals, it looks like, followed by consolidation or cost reduction, and then of course performance and high availability. So thank you. Thanks for sharing that. That helps our presenters today as they take the stage now and start talking about the Z15 T02. So Brian, it is all yours.
Good day. Thanks, Marie. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Hope you all are doing well. Our objective today is to provide you with an overview of the Z15 T02 technology, and we'll be highlighting some of the functionality as part of the modernization that you all just mentioned in the survey. So I hope you find it beneficial. We'll skim through these things pretty quickly, and if you have questions, please feel free to ask, and we'll answer them as best we can. In addition to providing you the overview of the T02, we'll also briefly mention the LT2, which is the Linux-only option. Just from an awareness standpoint, it's basically the same hardware, so there really aren't any differences to discuss other than, you know, a few things we'll point out along the way. Anyway, I think we can move on and talk about the Z15 T02. It is the single frame option that joins the previously announced T01 that was announced last year. That's the multi-frame option. We used to call these things business class and enterprise class. They've gotten away from that naming convention, but so you have the single frame T02 and the multi-frame T01. They both have Linux 1 options for them, the LT2 and the LT1. So just understand that you have a wide range of options when it comes time to finding the right Z system that might work for you all. So they're based upon the same chip technology, and that's kind of been the case for quite some time as we've rolled out, you know, even back to Z13, Z15, 14, and so on. So let's talk a bit about, I'm going to spend a fair amount of time on this slide because there's a lot of content. So I just kind of want to go over what we're talking about here. We'll start with the naming first because, you know, you hear a lot of names tossed around. I've already mentioned Z15 model T02. It is a model type 8562. And beneath that, we have what's called feature-based sizing that I'll get to in just a little bit. But basically, this is a rack-mounted solution, much like the, so if you're familiar with the Z13, that was still in the frame technology. The Z14 delivered a rack-mounted technology. This is a carry forward of what was announced originally in the Z14. So you have a rack-mounted solution. Unlike the Z14-01, if you recall, and you may or may not be aware, but three-phase power went away with that technology. It's back in this technology. So you have more flexible power options as you consider the T02. Okay. From a processor unit standpoint, I mentioned this has feature-based sizing and configuring. There are 5 options that you have on this, and if you look over the right, you kind of see them listed in the table. They're max 4 through max 65. The max 4, 13, 21, and 31 are single drawer based solutions, and the number after the max talks about how many physical characterizable engines exist within that that configuration. Based upon your needs, you can find the right CPC drawer configuration that'll help serve your needs. So since the ZBC12, I believe, you've been able to characterize up to 6 of those engines for general purpose workload. That's the case with this one. And other engines that are, for instance, on a Max 13, you can have 6 of those be general purpose engines. The rest can be used for things like ICFs, zips, and IFLs. So you still have all those options for characterizing the processor to meet your needs. There are 2 to 8 SAPs per system, depending on the configuration. And like with the Z13S, 14, and now the 15, you can have up to 40 LPARs for your environment. There are also going to be integrated accelerators for cryptography and compression. We'll talk about those in a bit more detail shortly, but just understand that there are some changes with regard to how some of the underlying and supporting technology is being rolled into the Z15. And it all has to do with enhancing how these things actually function, how, you know, the performance of them and things like that. Memory, RAM memory, like we've been delivering for a bit, you can have a minimum, the base level configuration is 64 gig. And again, if you refer to the table over to the right, you can see what the max memory configurations are. And depending on where you are, you have a lot of granularity with regard to what level of memory might be appropriate for you. So you can work with your mainline SEs to help arrive at what's appropriate for your situation. The HSA is increased to 160 gig. I know some of you are probably going, wow, that's grown a lot. It has. I'll talk about that more in a little bit. And IBM virtual flash memory, I think, yeah, Dave's going to be talking about this in a bit more detail, but there's some changes with that too that actually work to your advantage from a performance standpoint. Relative to accessing your data, there's been a refresh of the hyperlink technology that was originally delivered with the Z14 ZR1. And so that basically, the improved it gives you the direct connection over a short distance link to your FICON-based attached storage. And so there are some performance advantages in the hyperlink technology. So as you know, we work with you and you think that's something you want to consider, be happy to help walk down that path with you to see if it's appropriate for your situation. The link technology has changed, and Dave will also talk about this, but they're no longer InfiniBand links on the Z15. That's the fulfillment of a statement of direction that's been out there for a time. So link technologies are handled with the ICA and the coupling express for long reach that you see listed there. I'll defer the rest of that. I'll let Dave represent that for you. So I'll go ahead and move on to the next and talk about the capacity setting options. I did mention that up to 6 of the engines are characterizable for general purpose workloads. So that basically gives you 156 capacity settings like we've been used to for a while. It lets you go from an A01, a 98 MIP A01 up to over 9,000 MIPs on the Z06. So that's a pretty good range, and of course you got all the granularity within the product line, so that gives you a lot of choice in you know, maybe your workload is more friendly to fewer engines and, you know, or more engines and that type of thing. We can help you figure that out, but you have a lot of granularity to match a properly configured capacity setting option to your workload requirements, which has always been a kind of a nice thing, especially with this lower end technology. The single engine speed is 761 MIPS, or what IBM's now referring to as PCI, so you may see that referred to differently. But basically, as has always been the case, all your specialty engines run at full speed. So that single engine speed, just to give you some perspective, is about 23% larger than the Z13S and about 12% larger than the Z14 ZR1. All right. Kind of I'll just do an aside to give you a brief advertisement for our capacity planning offering. As is the case anytime we refresh the technology, a lot of the underlying metrics relative to how workload is handled can change, and it can change in interesting and hard to explain ways sometimes. And so we always recommend that as you look forward to considering a refresh to this level of technology or any technology, that's always an exercise that pays off really well, because your workload evolves, and coupled with this new technology, things may have changed where you need a different quantity of engines, a different speed of engines, who knows what, more or fewer specialty engines. So it's always something to keep in mind, that as you move forward and plan for this technology, that you consider involving our capacity planning specialist in fitting this technology to your specific needs. Memory considerations. This just lays out again in the table the minimum and maximum for the different max configurations, both for T02 and LT2. All right, and so there are a couple things to note. Again, the HSA has grown quite a bit. And on the Z13, it was, I believe, 40 gig, and on the Z14, it was 64 gig. So there's a lot of growth there, and I think there's probably just a lot of underlying interesting things going on to where they need that available to do what happens under the covers. So an additional 20% of the memory is there for redundancy, and depending on it's kind of a hard one to explain, but depending on where you make your selection relative to usable memory, you want to have 160 gig, let's say. You may have certain combinations of memory selections that will allow you under the covers to have some additional memory there that can be activated via microcode. I say that because it's a little different from the past, because if you note down the bottom right-hand part of this chart, there is no flexible memory. And there's something I forgot to mention a bit ago, and I'll mention it right after this. The flexible memory is not available on here, and I'll explain why that's perhaps important. And plan ahead memory is no longer part of this, so you can't select a chunk of memory to have sitting aside ready for activation. All right. The thing I forgot to mention, and let me go back since I have the ability to do that. Here, I forgot to mention this item relative to a new feature that's fairly significant, and I blew right by it. I'm sorry for that. I mentioned the single drawer options of the 4, 13, 21, and 31, but the new there's a new second drawer option. So you can have a second drawer option that will accommodate up to 65 cores. Now, you may not necessarily need that many engines sitting there for use, but if you have a situation where you want to have the ability to have a second drawer and not have to take an outage, if you have two drawers there, you can take one offline and have one continue operating. If that's an important thing for your environment, for the first time, we're able to offer that on this level of the technology. So that's not something we've been able to do before. So if that's important for resiliency purposes, you now have the option to do that. And of course, you configure processing engines, specialty engines, and memory can be allocated to that second drawer. Now, coming back to this flexible memory option, if you're on what we used to call the enterprise class technology, there was flexible memory that allowed you to have basically reserve memory over there in case you took one of those processing drawers offline. It would shift everything over there and you'd have that flexible memory to take up the slack. That's not available in this case. So you just need to know that in planning for the type of resilience that's available on this processor. But that's kind of nice to have that that offered for the first time. New terminology for the Z, and this has to do with the fact that things are changing, and I just kind of want to go through that because you'll see terminology mentioned out there that well, just let me go through it and it'll probably make sense. The coprocessor is something that exists on every core of the system. CPACF, the base level cryptography, is an example of that. One of the reasons why they put that on every core become the mechanism to deliver on pervasive encryption. Okay, it allowed for a level of performance that was going to allow for that. Okay, and so CPACF is an example of a coprocessor. It exists on every core. An accelerator is on every chip, but not necessarily on every core. An example of that would be the enterprise data compression feature. That used to exist in a PCI card. I believe Dave's going to talk about that a little bit more. But so that's an example of an accelerator. And of course, the adapters, from, they've been around forever, FICON, coupling adapters and things like that. A special case would be the cryptography. Just understand that there's some naming changes going on with that to where they're calling them now hardware security modules. This, I don't know exactly why they changed the naming of it, but it can now be used on other platforms additional to Z. So that's kind of a change with that. All right. Availability. This was the processor was made available in May. So you see new build systems, the T02, the LT2, and upgrades from the ZR1 to T02 were available in May. As is usually the case on a newly announced technology, there is a window where you're not permitted to do MESs. For instance, if you brought in a configuration, you found you needed more of something, you're prohibited from doing that until mid-September. So MES orders for features within an originally ordered box, you can do that beginning mid-September. Upgrades, as the model has been for quite some time that you can upgrade N-2 technology into the newly announced platform. So with regard to the Z13, it's a little different in that we're coming from, again, as I mentioned earlier, the frame-based technology. So that doesn't really lend itself to being able to be MES, but you can still do a migration offering, which is basically what most folks are doing these days anyway. You bring in a whole box configured for your requirements, and it's priced accordingly to make that a favorable option for you. Of course, the Z14, based upon a rack technology, has both MES and migration offering available to it. You can see what they can upgrade to. Every upgrade within the Z15 line from Max 4 up to 31 is a disruptive upgrade because they are separate CPC drawers. The only one that is concurrent is if you were choosing to add a Max 65 for that level of resiliency. It's going to be its own drawer so it doesn't disrupt everything else. Okay, and over on the right at the bottom, you see some of the permitted and non-permitted upgrade scenarios. So I'll leave that for you to read on your own, but basically there's some limitations with regard to the Linux options. Here are the operating system support for the technology, and it probably is not surprising, all version 2 of ZOS. The only thing to kind of point out that's a little different here is with 2.1, its normal support has, we've reached the end of support date. And so in that case, you would need the IBM software extended support, and that will continue to be available until September of 2021. Okay, so that's the only thing you need to keep in mind there. ZVM 6471 and 7.2 is targeted to be available in third quarter this year. So that'll be available via C62, and you can see the traditional operating systems all laid out on the right. With regard to the Linux distributions, they're listed over to the right. And the only one thing I didn't list here would be the KVM support, but there's a link on here down at the bottom for the tested platforms. If you go there, it will have all that information for you. The question may come up with regard, since we're talking about software, with regard to, you going from an older technology to the new, and I'll just kind of mention this for what it's worth. As has been the case in the past, there will be a licensing technology advantage in going to the Z15 T02. That can be completely priced and characterized for you by your mainline reps, and so they'll be happy to do that. But it varies a little bit, and I think it's in the 5% territory. So as you move forward, expect that your licensing will be more favorable on the newer technology. All right. Right now, I'm going to turn it over to Dave, who's going to go in and discuss some of the newer features along with some of the other things you may want to consider as you move forward. Dave?
Okay, can you see my screen?
We can.
I can.
Okay. I am going to start out with the integrated accelerator for Z Enterprise Data Class, ZEDC. Essentially, this is a compression, decompression, nest accelerator function. It replaces the ZEDC Express card that IBM had previously released. The reason for that was, one, it increased performance by putting it on the core, but it also gave you a couple more I/O slots, and some customers were running into the area where they were running out of I/O slots, so it gives it. It uses all the standard compression and decompression standards. The benefits to customers are it can improve the throughput data over storage and communication networks. It allows more data to remain online. It can reduce the amount of data for encryption, and it typically improves some batch turnaround times. There's a way to find out what it would do for you. There's IBM has a tool called the Z Batch Network Analyzer, ZBNA, and Brian had talked about our fine capacity study guys. They can also take a look at what compression would do for you if you can send them the SMF 14, 15, 30, 42 records. They'll take a look and tell you exactly what it can do for you. It is architected in millicode, so it cut down the overhead, and that's another advantage from it being in the I/O drawer. Just some numbers on this chart. I wanted to go over between the Z14 and the Z15. With it being in the accelerator, the elapsed time is about 8 times faster, and the gigabytes per second went from about 8 gigabytes to about 260 on some of the larger Z15s. As always with IBM numbers, your mileage may vary. And also it's available on open source on ZVM on Linux, so across the board. Brian also talked about flash memory, and the main thing with flash memory was it does replace the Flash Express I/O feature. You can go up to 2 terabytes. They are priced features. Each feature is a half a terabyte. And the one thing that's different from the PCI card is that the storage that you put in the flash increments does take away from the total storage that you can put for in your central storage. But it does save the slots. And if you have these cards on a Z13S, it will, IBM does have a conversion into the Flash Express for an upgrade. FICON considerations. The FICON on these are the FICON Express 16S Plus. They'll auto negotiate to 4, 8, or 16 gigabytes per second. 2 gigabyte connectivity or 1 gigabyte per second connectivity is not supported for point-to-point connections, but the 2 gigabyte is supported through a switch with 8 or 16 gigabyte optics. One of the big things is Just like for if there's any old timers like me that remember when we went from the OSA 2s to the OSA 3s, you can't mix and match the definition types anymore. So if you're running fiber channel and fiber channel protocol on your FICON cards, you have to count and make sure that if you have an odd number of fiber channel protocol cards, that you have enough cards in the new configuration. And as always, when we do systems assurance, this is one of the questions that will certainly come up, and ask if you're doing fiber channel protocol to make sure you count the ports, and we know exactly how many ports are fiber channel, how many are fiber channel protocol, and then we go from there. InfiniBand, the coupling considerations. On the older versions of the Z, they had the InfiniBand, the HCA3 short range, and the HCA3 long range. In the Z15, we now have the coupling express long range, or the ICA short range. And if you're in a Plex with a Z13 and you're still using the InfiniBand, your options are to either put a Z14 standalone coupling facility, or if there's a Z14 in the sysplex, you can go from the InfiniBand to the Z13 to the Z14 and then do the coupling express or the ICA to the Z15. Instant recovery boost. This is kind of a neat feature. It was previously system recovery boost. And what customers were looking for was a faster recovery from a planned or an unplanned outage, and in order to help meet their service level agreements. It improves your IPL and middleware speed, helps you catch up with some lost work, and it enables a faster GDPS site switch and site failure recovery. You can jump to full speed on the subcapacity CPs by LPAR for up to 60 minutes with no charge on the software. You can also use your zips for CP workload for up to 60 minutes with no charge on your software. They used to have a system recovery boost record in the previous version. Now that is not available. Okay, moving on to ZCX, and there is going to be a full session on September 9th. I think Marie showed it in the first slide, talking about CZX, but essentially ZOS Container Extension, CZX, was announced in ZOS 2.4, and it delivers unmodified Linux on Z Docker images running under ZOS. So it helps you modernize the Z workloads by providing flexibility. It integrates with your DevOps tools. You can use existing IT investments in Linux within the Z platform. It provides the quality of service that ZOS and Z customers are accustomed to as far as availability, reliability, serviceability, and scalability. The container extensions essentially give you the capabilities for the ZOS environment to allow developers to deploy Linux on Z Docker workloads on ZOS. Applications will look like Docker applications to the developer, not ZOS applications. And if an application comes from a Linux on Z, then no ZOS skills are required. This can minimize the barrier to develop IBM Z platform in modernizing ZOS workloads by providing flexibility in development and operations on Z. And it also helps in the disaster recovery scenario, as you can recover like you do the Z. And the bonus is that the workloads that run on that are also zip eligible. So the requirements, it requires a Z15 or a Z14 feature code 0104 and ZOS 2.4. It's perfect for applications that are tightly integrated with ZOS. It's not a good fit for things that have no affinity to ZOS. It's not a replacement for native ZOS software or Unix system services. Not a good fit for software that requires very large compute resources. It's not a replacement for Linux on Z or Linux under ZVM or Linux under KVM or Linux One offerings. And there are a couple links here that you guys can go to and take a look at some offerings for Linux on Z. If you haven't looked at it in a while, I would highly suggest it. Linux on Z can save you an awful lot of money and make life a lot easier for your Linux staff. Another new feature is the hardware management appliance. And essentially what this is it takes the hardware, the HMC, and puts it like the SEs have been in previous models in the KEK, running the SEs as guests under the HMC. You get two HMCs and two SEs. You can log on to them remotely. It's the same driver code as a physical HMC. It's not replacing the physical HMC yet, unless you want to. You can still get physical HMCs, but I think that's the direction IBM is heading. So if not on this one, I think on future ones, it may be the only option. You can have up to 10 physical HMCs, and an HMA can be ordered and used. It runs in Prism and DPM mode. And even if the Z15 is powered off, the HMAs will still have power and can act as HMCs for any other systems. What's not offered in the Z15? Plan ahead memory. Brian talked about that. It's not gone, but the flash memory is available. The system recovery boost upgrade record isn't available, but instant recovery boost is available. The HMC does support N-2, but it no longer does N-4. Some of the I/O features offered in the Z15, some of the older FICON and OSAs and coupling are not supported. DVD support on the HMC, now it's either memory stick or FTP. We kind of talked about the HCA, the InfiniBand. They're no longer available. Now they have the new coupling. ZEDC Express, the ZEDC is still available, but the ZEDC Express I/O cards aren't. And the last one here, fiber channel endpoint security. This was announced and available on the Z15 Enterprise class machine, but it wasn't announced on the Z14. It is a statement of direction, and hopefully we'll see it when they do the version 2 of the code on the Z15. But right now it's just a statement of direction from IBM. The power save mode is gone. The emergency power off switch is gone. It's the first machine I've ever seen that didn't have an emergency power off switch. The internal battery feature, chip and type OSN and OSX have been gone for a while. The Flash Express we talked about. No ZBX or the ensemble mode. They have taken those away. The OSA Express 4S and Crypto Express 4S are no longer available. Oh, sorry. Power planning. The reason I put this in here is because on the Z14, one of the things that customers were kind of upset about was that it only did one phase, and that most customers did 3-phase on their previous machines. And with the Z15, they brought the 3-phase back. And if you choose 3-phase and you choose the Hubble connectors, they're exactly like the 3-phase was on the previous versions that you've been able to carry over. As always, my recommendation when you're doing power planning is to get the IBM installation planning rep involved, have them do a power profile. We can do that for you. I mean, we can talk to them and get them to do that. And also, if necessary, do a site a visit and make sure that everybody's on the same page as far as the power and the weight and the, if any stanches or anything like that are available. Frame considerations, it's a 19-inch rack. Customers been asking for that, and they delivered in the Z14, and now these are pretty much the future. They're designed to fit in the hot cold aisle. They can be integrated into your existing aisles. One of the changes here, it came with the Z14, but also in the Z15, is only rear exit cabling. So you only need one cutout instead of the two, and it can be on a raised floor or non-raised floor. It enables clients to achieve floor space reduction, which is why they were asking for it to be in a 19-inch rack for years. We talked about the cutout, talked about the internal battery feature and the EPO switch going. The pedestals are one thing that you just may have to reevaluate where they are, but pretty much here's the dimensions. Top and bottom exit options. This one is one I put in here because IBM kind of changed the way they do the top and the bottom exit, and all of the systems, whether you choose top exit or bottom exit, can exit out of the top. The top exit cabling has a top hat for fiber transport services. If you don't order the top hat, then the recommendation is to still go with bottom exit cabling. And because if you order the top exit, it'll put a bottom plate. So if you want to do power out the bottom, then there's a plate there that has to be removed, or you need to go around it. So unless you're doing the top hat feature, the recommendation is to go with bottom exit cabling, and you can still do top exit cabling out the top. Return shipping, again, this is something the customers have been complaining about, that the return packaging always shipped with the processor. And if anybody's gone through this, you know it's a lot of packaging that has to be stored somewhere. And IBM has finally said that we don't have to ship it with the processor. We can MES it later. If you are shipping, moving a box from one location to another location, we can send the shipping to one location where the old box was, and the machine to the new location. So this is something the customers have asked for a long time, and IBM is now delivering it so that we can order it right before it's ready to ship back if you're doing an MES or a migration offering. I think that's it. Okay, and then statements of directions. Prepaid token expiration for capacity, on-off capacity on demand. Once you ordered a prepaid token, it would last until you used it. It now expires after 5 years after the license expiration date, which is the last year when they can send when they do microcode upgrades. When the microcode upgrades end, the 5 years starts at that point. And this is a change, so it is something for customers that do on-off capacity on demand should take a look at. Future HMC hardware. Again, we kind of talked about this. The hardware management appliance is going to end up being probably the way to go in the future. Boot support for NVMe. In the future, IBM plans to allow booting from NVMe storage. Reserve space on the Z15, unlike the Z14, IBM did not announce at announcement time that we could put the DS8910F in the reserve space on the Z15, cutting down the floor space that's needed. They did announce it as a statement of direction. My understanding is they're certifying it, and as soon as it's certified, we expect, if the certification goes okay, that they are going to announce that we can put it in there. But for right now, if you order a Z15 with an 8910F, the 8910F has to go in a separate rack. Hopefully that'll change in the future. The reserve space, also for the FS9200 and FS7200, the fiber channel switch infrastructure, that is, their intent is to allow you to use that in the reserve space. But right now it is still a statement of direction as they're doing certification on that. The next up is Caesar, and he is going to talk about early ship program experience on the Z15 with one of his customers. So Caesar, go ahead, I'll drive for you.
Thank you, Brian. Good afternoon. My name is Cesar Yoan. I'll just take a few minutes to talk to you about ASG's experience with the early ship program and the Z15. If you can move to the next slide, Brian.
Oh. Sorry, for some reason, I'm locked up here. Hang on, give me a second. Oh, there we go.
No worries. Okay.
Hey.
Can you back up? There we go.
All
yeah,
right.
So we're good. I will start by telling you a little about ASG. Most of you are probably familiar with ASG. They are an independent software vendor providing solutions across the globe to some of the largest companies and institutions. ASG was founded by Arthur Allen in 1986 and grew very rapidly. And as of 2015, Arthur released the company to a consortium of new owners, and it has now become ASG Technologies Group. Now, ASG serves more than 3,500 customers in 60 countries worldwide and has reported over $250 million in revenue last year. They are a part of IBM's Partner World Developer Program, and as such, they invest in IBM technology initiatives and exploit IBM's new product features to deliver valued customer solutions. When the Z15 T02 ESP program was announced, it aligned with ASG's PW contract expiration date. Therefore, ASG volunteered to be a participant. We installed their new Z15 IO5 in late April amid issues with COVID-19, which delayed shipments and made meetings even more difficult. But we were able to get that done on time before GA time. If we go to the next page, I will tell you more about the reasons why ASG upgraded to the new Z15. So, as I stated before, ASG provides software solutions to their customers, and therefore exploring new technologies and building value solutions on top of those technologies is of big interest to ASG. When we brought this to them, their developers were very anxious to learn more about what the Z15 had to offer and how to leverage the different features of the Z15. As part of the PWD program, the Partner World Developer Program, ASG receives many software discounts and needs to stay up to date with technology. Therefore, cost savings was a big factor in obtaining a Z15. ASG also obtained a new DS8887 and Optica BTS system. And these, coupled with the 5 and 16 gigabit cards, provided the performance that they were looking for. ASG used encryption on the Z13, but wanted to move into pervasive encryption, which is provided by the Z15. Overall, the performance benefits from the processor, the memory enhancements, instant boost recovery, hyperboost technology were of big interest to ASG. If we move to the next page, I can tell you some of what we observe. So these are a few observations from the ESP program. It says CBN 6.4, but in reality it's CBN 6.3. It is documented that CBN 6.3 is not supported on the Z15 T02. We asked IBM if we could bring it up in a second level, but that was not tested by the labs. And therefore, ASG had to migrate their CBM 6.2 systems up to 7.1. We observed performance improvements overall in the machine in the different applications. but unfortunately, we do not have any hard data for it. We have not collected all the data to analyze it. STP is a lot easier to configure nowadays, and with all the nice GUI screens on the HMC. However, some systems programmers and operators were not happy with the change to the 3-view that is on the HMC and the support elements. There's a small learning curve, and getting used to it will take a little while. There were many devices that needed to be cleaned up on HCD, and while doing the DASI migration configurations, IPL parameters, and therefore we took this opportunity to clean all that up. Overall, the ESP program allowed the ESG to obtain a Z15 before it became G8 and exploit all the different technologies that they can now use in their solutions. And IBM provided constant support throughout the program with weekly meetings and hands-on-deck folks that were able to answer all the questions we had. And that's all I have.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. Dave, if you can just forward to the next slide, that would be awesome. There
Questions?
you go. Questions. It's
Sorry.
question time.
I had a little trouble with my laptop here.
That's quite all right. So it is question time. So if you have questions, please use your little chat window, your question window, and go ahead and send them to us, and we will take as many as we have time allotted to do that. I chatted out to everybody. I did put this presentation, it's in a PDF format, up in the handout window here in GoToWebinar. So you have the ability during this webinar to go ahead and download that for yourselves. So if you'd like a copy of this, please go ahead, find that handout window there on your control panel and download yourselves a copy of the presentation. There were several links I know that Dave had put in there and some other pertinent information. So go ahead and grab that presentation while we're still here live. All right, so we have a few questions that have come in. Let's see, question 1. Is it possible to supply the rack for the Z15?
This is Brian. I can take that if I can. Do I have my mic on?
Yes.
Just now, you're fine.
Okay. Yeah. Good question. It is rack-based, but it is required that you use the rack that's provided with the technology. You do not have the option to provide your own rack system for the Z15.
Okay, great. Thank you. And another question is about PVU ratings. And Jerry is asking, what is the PVU rating used for software on the Z15?
PVU rating is 100, same as it's been for the last, I don't know how many processors, hasn't changed.
Long time.
Okay. And a question here from Tom. Tom says, which of my PCIe I/O adapters can I continue to carry forward to the Z15 T02?
Right.
Depends where you're coming from. And I guess the best way to answer that is to work with your mainline SC. And what they'll do is they have the ability to take your current environment and configure it to the new T02, and they'll be able to outline exactly what can be brought forward and what cannot. So that's probably the best way to get your cleanest answer on that.
Okay, good.
It's a good
Thanks,
question,
Brian.
though.
Yep, absolutely. And a question about availability. And the question is, when is or was the Z15 rather, T02 made available?
That was was it 15th?
Yeah, May 15th.
May 15th.
Good question.
So we're
it's
about
recent.
a month into it.
Okay. And Dave is asking, how many spare cores are there on the T02?
Oh, that's a really good question. Spare cores. The first two max configurations have one spare core, and I think everything above that has two. It is in the tech guide, but I believe that's a correct statement, what I just said. But you can validate that in the Z15 T02 technical guide. It's outlined in there in a nice table. I'm just trying. I didn't include it as part of this, but that's a really good question.
And Brian, would they find that technical guide online someplace? Is it a red book or something? Or
just do a Google
Hey,
Z15
Brian,
guide. And
you're 100% right. It's one on the first two and then two after that.
Yeah.
Okay. You heard it here, folks.
And if you have available, you can also add more spares if you need them.
Right.
If you have available cores.
Okay, super. Great, thank you. And thanks for all those questions. Those were great. Are there any other questions for Brian, Dave, or for Caesar? Oh, here's another question. Carrie is asking, will the Z15 T02 be the last Z system with a standalone HMC?
Reading the tea leaves, I would guess that that's the direction IBM's going in. They haven't announced. They announced a statement of direction, but it's like the classic style, tree style, where they announced that I think it was the Z12 was supposed to be the last classic style, but then customers went back and kind of changed their mind. Statement of direction is that that's where they're heading, but can't say for sure what IBM's going to do from day to day. So I would count that way that's probably the direction they're going, because the Linux is the last. They did announce that the Linux one would be the last one, so probably the Z is going to be too, but I think they're waiting to see what the customer reaction is.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dave, for the answer, and thank you, Carrie, for your question. All right, the question window's quiet, so thank you all very much for all that. So it is time to wrap this up. We kept it under an hour, so I'm glad you all stayed with us for the entire time. We appreciate your time. We appreciate you as customers, and if we can do anything to assist, by all means, reach out. You have everyone's emails are in that document. So feel free to email any of us, and we hope to see you on our future sessions. We look forward to seeing your registrations and I'll call them your smiling faces. So until then, we hope you have a super day and a great rest of your week. Stay safe, stay well, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.